So I'd always been interested in biology and enjoyed those courses throughout elementary school, high school, and anatomy and physiology. I was fascinated by the nervous system in particular and how the brain worked. And I had kind of a personal story about why I got interested in neuroscience. My grandmother was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia.
Mm.
And so that just kind of fueled me to learn more and more about the brain and health and disease. And so when I was looking at colleges, I found a college that had the opportunity to study neuroscience. And so I thought I was heading down this road of being a neuroscientist, learning more about the brain and health and disease. But I found that I really needed the human connection that came with medicine. So I couldn't see myself just sitting in a lab all day and reading all day and doing experiments. I needed that intimate human connection that you get with medicine. Medicine's a funny business. It's people taking care of people, uh, but it's a very rewarding career path to be in. And so it combined my passion for neuroscience and learning about the nervous system and the brain with being able to directly impact patients' lives. So I went to medical school thinking that's what I was going to do, neurology. That's what I was interested in. It naturally fit my interests. Uh, Again, that personal story kind of pushed me towards that. So I really enjoyed studying up on how these different types of cells decided to degenerate. So the degenerative neurological diseases were very interesting to me. However, when I started doing neurology as a clinical in my third year, I quickly realized that that wasn't for me. I needed something more hands-on. I
Mm.
needed something where I could have a quicker impact on patients' lives. And
Mhm.
most of these degenerative diseases, it's a long-term medical care and working through it with these patients and their families versus the thing I ended up in, neurosurgery, was something that we could have an impact right away. And I found that I just that was just something in me. Thankfully, when I finished my neurology rotation, I was like, oh no, what am I going to do with my life? I'm now a third year medical student. My next rotation was neurosurgery.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, it came together. I love the nervous system. I get to have an impact right away on patients. And I grew up in a rural farm town. So I was used to working with my hands, fixing things,
Yeah.
very mechanical. I was like, this just brings together everything, just makes me excited. And so it just happened to work out that that happened to be my next rotation. And it just grabbed me like, this is what I want to do. This really fits everything.
Very interesting. Okay. And you went to Southern Illinois for medical school, correct?
Yes,
Did they have a residency program when you were at Southern Illinois at the
they
time?
didn't.
Okay.
So they were applying while I was there. They took their first resident. They entered the match the year after I matched. So I did have a lot of help and mentorship from the neurosurgeons that were there because
Hmm.
they were going through that process of getting accredited. And there was particularly a junior neurosurgery faculty member. His name was Devin Amin, and he became my main mentor for making that transition from medical school to residency. And he was invaluable. Neurosurgery is such a small field.
Hmm.
Uh, you really need to have neurosurgery mentors to help you make each one of those transitions, particularly medical school to residency.
Yes, many of our viewers come from schools without home programs. I actually am going to South Alabama, so we have a department here. But there certainly are challenges coming from a program from a medical school without a residency program. So I wanted to ask you that real quick.
Definitely. Yeah, it is challenging, but I'm here as living proof it's possible.
Yes, exactly.
Was leaning towards it. I tried to go in with an open mind, just like I did in medical school, even though I was leaning towards neurology. It was one of those things where you're never going to see these other things again. So you might as well enjoy it and soak it up while you can.
Hmm.
But I was leaning towards functional. I also really enjoyed pediatrics. I
Hmm.
enjoyed the variety of pediatric cases, working with both the child and the parents. Uh, but there's something about functional neurosurgery, particularly deep brain stimulation, where we could interact with these networks and have such a profound effect on patients' level of function, their quality of life, that I just was completely drawn towards. One of my mentors, who's a functional neurosurgeon, used to always say what drew him to functional neurosurgery was small procedure, big impact. And I would agree that fits my personality. So I just enjoy being able to do that.
Very interesting. Okay. So I was reading through your biography, and you did some basic science research during your residency, it looks like. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so my research is in the translational field looking at spinal cord stimulation and its physiological effects. I got drawn towards it through just a single patient case encounter. I had a patient who underwent a spinal cord stimulator for bilateral low extremity pain, pretty classic. This was with my main functional mentor now that I was in residency. And this patient came back at 6 weeks for normal follow-up, and we were saying, how is your pain doing? Oh, it's a little better. We're working on it. But my restless leg syndrome, it's gone. You guys are miracle workers. And they're like, that's weird. What's going on there? Let's take a look at the literature. Nothing in the literature. That's really interesting. Let's see if this is a placebo effect, because it's only been 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So we brought him back 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, still restless leg syndrome symptoms gone. And not only that, he'd been able to come off his restless leg syndrome medication. So his quality of life was significantly improved. He could sleep again. And we had him keep a journal when he was using the stimulators. We were trying to figure out because that's the only thing that's changed is the stimulator's been in place. He was only using the stimulator at night before he'd go to bed. So it was in some way, we don't know. We're trying to think through the pathophysiologist, this ongoing research. Was he increasing blood flow to his legs? Is he distracting the nervous system the way we try to distract it with spinal cord stimulation for pain? And that research remains ongoing, but that's what got me into this whole field of translational spinal cord stimulation research. And through that, we found that one of our ideas was blood flow. If you turn a stimulator off, we brought in these patients for 48 hours, bring them into the lab, we can record their sympathetic tone with a small micro tungsten electrode in the peroneal nerve, and record from a population of sympathetic fibers called sympathetic C fibers. And we got a baseline. We turn the stimulator on, and very clear drop in sympathetic tone that occurs over an hour. We recorded for an hour, and then we turn the stimulator back off, and a retreat to baseline over 50% in 15 minutes. So that's another line of inquiry that we're working on now, is how is the stimulator interacting with the sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. And interestingly, doing our literature search in someone who has a spinal cord injury, so cervical spinal cord, where they've lost connection between the brain and the sympathetic fibers, the sympathetic chain, these stimulators do the opposite. So those patients suffer from hypotension. Their sympathetic nervous system's disconnected. We can turn these on. This is research that's been done elsewhere, and that'll pull their blood pressure up.
Interesting.
If you're ramping the sympathetic tone up. So how it's doing that, why it's doing that, we don't know, but it seems as though it's pulling everyone to a happy medium through this modulation. Right?
Oh, very interesting.
It's just been, then you start thinking, what else could this be? What else could this do? Could this help people with refractory hypertension? So all sorts of interesting things branch off of just this single patient observation that occurred when I was a second-year resident. It's just driven me ever since.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so one patient, PGY2, and it's driven your research career since then. That's very interesting. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a step back real quick. And so for our viewers that don't know a lot about functional neurosurgery, do you mind just giving a broad overview of what the field is and kind of its scope?
So the way I kind of group functional neurosurgery into 3 big buckets: surgical treatment of pain. It's kind of the classic functional neurosurgery. Surgical treatment of movement disorders via that's our deep brain stimulation, thalamotomy, high frequency ultrasound are things that you may have heard of in the news, and surgical treatment of epilepsy. And so most functional neurosurgeons do a little bit of each. So we may subspecialize into one or the other, but that's the general way of thinking of functional neurosurgery. Is we're interacting with networks and that are dysfunctional and trying to make them more functional. So whether that's a hyperactive network in epilepsy or in tremor, or a dysfunctional pain network, we're trying to do procedures that can interact with that and make a patient's quality of life better.
Very interesting. Okay. I have two more questions for you, and I'm just going to ask them both at the same time. So, which findings in the basic science domain and the technology development domain do you believe have the greatest potential to drive the field forward over the next, let's say, 5 years and 10 years?
Yeah, I think what's coming next for functional neurosurgery is something we're always thinking about uh, here at a center like UAB is uh, refining the patient selection and being able to more widely deploy deep brain stimulation for psychological disorders. The biggest one being depression. And that is just bubbling right under the surface that we know it works and if we can select the right patient. And so as we've learned, and this comes from 2 failed clinical trials, but taking the subset data and then working that, and we've seen this over the past 5-7 years, that we can start to refine the target. Because the target's difficult. The target's a white matter track in most cases, rather than a nucleus, a gray matter target. So refining that and refining who's going to respond. And so that's gotten much better, and it feels so close each year. So this is the year we're gonna figure it out. And then another one of my interests / passions in the same domain is DBS for obsessive compulsive disorder, because we've seen that work as well. And while that has an FDA humane device exemption, it's very difficult to get payers or insurers to cover that procedure, which is very frustrating for us, because we have another DBS disorder, dystonia, that also has an FDA humane device exemption, and yet we don't have any trouble getting that covered. They're very limited in mild in a few cases. But it's really amazing when you see a patient, and we had a series of this when I was a resident. We published a series of 7 patients. It takes time. It's a psychological disorder, and so we are tuning and trying to modulate these networks. But over the course of a year or 2, these patients become way more functional. I mean, just simple example of one patient in our series who went from spending more time in the hospital than out over the course of a year. We flipped that.
Wow.
That's a big deal for this patient. They can live in their home rather than in the hospital more time out of the year. And we don't have any great data on why it takes a while. My speculation is because we're implanting kind of the worst of the worst. And what we're doing is we're bringing their disease low enough that traditional methods, cognitive behavioral therapy, can actually participate in that. And I guess clinically and technology, they're kind of coming together. But clinically, I'm most excited about psychological disease treatment and modulation of that. That's going to require a partner with psychiatry. And we've seen more interest in that from some of the younger psychiatrists who are interested in these new technologies and willing to come along with us. Technologically, because while something like Parkinson's disease and tremor will fluctuate throughout the day, it's not really fluctuating as much in terms of, if you think of variance, as a psychological disease. And so I think we're going to need to study and understand these disorders with a sensing arm and have a device that can use that data to adjust its stimulation pattern. Sounds very science fiction, but people are exploring that in other domains. In Tourette's disease. So these are all exciting things that are out there that are just inching forward each year, and so it's exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah. So one thing that you said that really was interesting to me is the randomized control trials coming back negative for depression, and that you said that when people were looking at specific subsets, there was some promising information there. What was that promising information? You said it. I think you said it came out of patient selection.
Yeah. So some of it was patient selection. Some of it is the variance in lead placement, because it's a harder target. The target that was identified is bringing together of multiple bundles. And so when they looked at some of the stimulation fMRI data post hoc, it may not be that the patient didn't respond. It may just be the lead's not in an ideal spot. And that would be exciting to us because that's fixable.
Right. Yeah.
And something we talk about, or I talk about, with just Parkinson's and tremor patients. And there's really only 2 major reasons why we have a DBS failure, or we put in a lead and we don't get an expected response. Either we got the diagnosis wrong, or we put the lead in the wrong spot, or it's not an ideal spot. And we can fix the lead. And so to me, that, well, we had a failure of a trial, and the failure started to point out, okay, here's what we need to fix. And so we're moving forward. And I think that is to me the next big thing that we're looking at.
Thanks for watching and being a part of this journey to improve brain and spine health around the world. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like, share it with someone who might benefit, and subscribe to our channel for more free educational content. And if you believe in our mission, visit brainandspinegroup.org to make a donation today.